The little boy's voice rang out across the pack gathering like a thunderclap. "Mama!" 3-year-old Klaus ran past his father, past the woman who'd stolen everything, and wrapped his tiny arms around Greta's legs. The entire Shadowmoon Pack fell silent. Wilhelm's face went white. And Greta's sister Helga, the woman who'd been playing mother for 6 months, looked like she'd been struck by lightning. But let me tell you something before we go any further. If this story is hitting you right in the chest, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, I need you to do something for me right now. Smash that like button, because this tale gets darker before the dawn breaks. And listen, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. Because after what you're about to hear, you might need one. Drop your city in the comments right now. Oh wait. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Greta Albrecht had always believed in 3 things: family, fate, and the bond between true mates. She'd grown up in the Shadowmoon Pack, the daughter of a respected warrior who'd fallen in battle when she was young. Her mother raised her and her younger sister Helga alone, teaching them that pack meant everything, that loyalty was the highest virtue, and that when you found your mate, you protected that bond with your life. Greta was 23 when she first caught Wilhelm Brenner's scent at the Harvest Moon Festival. It hit her like a physical force, like the universe had reached down and grabbed her by the soul. Wilhelm was the Alpha's nephew, a lieutenant in the Pack's defense force, with dark hair and eyes the color of winter storms. When their eyes met across the bonfire, Greta felt the mate bond snap into place with a certainty that shook her to her core. Wilhelm felt it too. She could see it in the way his pupils dilated, the way he moved through the crowd toward her like she was the only person in the world. That night, under the full moon, they ran together through the forest, their wolves singing with joy at finding their other half. "You're mine," Wilhelm had whispered against her hair as they lay in the grass, watching the stars. "I've waited my whole life for you." "And you're mine," Greta had replied, believing with every fiber of her being that this was forever. They were bonded within the month, in a ceremony that had the whole pack celebrating. Greta's mother cried tears of joy. Her sister Helga stood beside her as her maid of honor, smiling that sweet smile that Greta had trusted since they were children. Wilhelm's family welcomed her with open arms. Everything was perfect, or so Greta thought. The first year of their bonding was everything Greta had dreamed of. Wilhelm was attentive, loving, protective. They built a home on the eastern edge of Pack territory, a small cabin that Wilhelm expanded with his own hands. Greta worked as a healer, learning from the Pack's elder medicine woman, Frau Hildegard. Wilhelm rose through the ranks of the Pack's defense force, earning respect and admiration from everyone who served with him. When Greta discovered she was pregnant, their joy was complete. Wilhelm would press his ear to her growing belly, talking to their unborn pup. He painted the nursery himself, a soft blue with silver moons on the ceiling. They chose the name Klaus after Wilhelm's grandfather, a legendary alpha who'd led the pack through a time of great danger. But pregnancy changed Greta's body in ways she hadn't expected. By her 7th month, she was exhausted constantly, her ankles swollen, her back aching. The healers assured her this was normal, that she was carrying a strong pup who would be born healthy. But Greta felt ungainly, unattractive, and increasingly insecure. That's when Helga started coming around more often. First, Greta was grateful. Her sister would help with the housework, bring meals, sit with her during the long afternoons when Wilhelm was on patrol. Helga was 21, unmated, beautiful in a way that Greta had never been. Where Greta had their mother's sturdy build and practical features, Helga had inherited something more delicate, more striking. Her hair was lighter, her eyes brighter, her figure willowy and graceful. "You need to rest," Helga would say, taking over tasks that Greta struggled with. "Let me handle this. You're carrying the future of this family." Wilhelm seemed grateful for Helga's help too. He'd thank her profusely, relief evident in his eyes that someone was there to care for Greta when he couldn't be. Looking back, Greta could see how blind she'd been. How she'd missed the way Helga's hand would linger on Wilhelm's arm. How she'd dismissed the way her sister always seemed to be there when Wilhelm came home, looking fresh and lovely while Greta felt like a beached whale. Klaus was born on a winter night when the moon was full. The labor was difficult, lasting nearly 18 hours. Greta remembered the pain, the fear, and then the overwhelming rush of love when they placed her son in her arms. He was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and his father's storm-gray eyes. Wilhelm had wept when he held Klaus for the first time. "My son," he'd whispered. "My perfect son." For 3 months, Greta lived in a fog of exhaustion and love. Klaus was a difficult baby, colicky and restless, sleeping only in short bursts. Greta was constantly tired, her body still recovering from the birth, her mind scattered from lack of sleep. Wilhelm tried to help, but his duties to the pack kept him away for long hours. And Helga was always there. "Let me take him for a while," she'd offer, reaching for Klaus. "You need sleep, sister. You look terrible." The comments started subtly. Little observations that seemed like concern but landed like tiny cuts. "You haven't lost the weight yet. It's been months. Wilhelm looks so tired. This must be hard on him. I remember when you used to take pride in your appearance." Greta told herself it was her own insecurity making her sensitive. Helga was helping. Helga loved her. Helga would never deliberately hurt her. But then came the night that shattered everything. Wilhelm had been distant for weeks. When Greta tried to initiate intimacy, he'd turn away, claiming exhaustion. When she tried to talk to him, he'd find reasons to leave. He started taking extra patrols, volunteering for assignments that kept him away from home for days at a time. Greta felt the mate bond between them weakening, like a rope slowly fraying. She could feel his emotional withdrawal, the way he was pulling away from her bit by bit. Terrified her. One evening, Greta decided to surprise Wilhelm at the pack house where he'd been staying during a late meeting. She asked old Frau Margarethi to watch Klaus, put on her best dress, one that actually fit her post-pregnancy body, and walked the mile to the pack center. She heard them before she saw them. The sounds were coming from one of the private meeting rooms. Greta's wolf, usually docile and calm, suddenly went wild inside her, clawing to get out. She followed the sounds, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, Greta saw her mate and her sister in an embrace that left no doubt about what was happening. Wilhelm's hands were in Helga's hair. Helga's dress was half off. And the way they were kissing, the desperate hunger in it, told Greta that this wasn't the first time. The sound that came out of Greta's throat was inhuman, a howl of anguish and rage that brought pack members running. Wilhelm and Helga sprang apart. Wilhelm's face showed guilt, but also something worse, relief. Relief at being caught. Relief that he didn't have to pretend anymore. "Greta," he started, but she was already backing away, shaking her head, her whole world crumbling. "How long?" she demanded. Her voice didn't sound like her own. Helga, straightening her dress with trembling hands, had the audacity to look defiant. "Does it matter?" "How long?" Wilhelm couldn't meet her eyes. 2 months. 2 months. While Greta had been caring for their infant son, exhausting herself, blaming herself for the distance between them, he'd been sleeping with her sister. With Helga. With the person Greta had trusted more than anyone in the world besides Wilhelm himself. The mate bond, already frayed, snapped completely that night. Greta felt it like a physical severing, like something essential had been torn from her chest. She collapsed right there in the hallway of the pack house, her screams bringing the alpha himself running. What happened next was a blur. Pack law was clear about infidelity between bonded mates, but it was also patriarchal and old-fashioned. The alpha, a stern wolf named Ludwig Schaefer, called a pack tribunal. Greta, still reeling from shock, had to stand before the pack elders and detail her humiliation. Wilhelm confessed everything. He claimed he'd tried to fight the attraction to Helga, but it had been overwhelming. He said something about second-chance mates, about how rare and precious they were, about how the bond with Helga was even stronger than what he'd felt with Greta. "Sometimes the universe makes mistakes with first bonds," he'd said, the words like knives in Greta's heart. What Helga and I have is real. It's true mate bond, not just compatible wolves. Helga stood beside him, playing the role of the apologetic but helpless lover. I never meant for this to happen, she'd said, casting her eyes down. But you can't fight fate, sister. Wilhelm and I are meant to be together. Our wolves recognize each other as true mates. The pack elders deliberated for 3 days. In the end, their ruling was pragmatic and cold. Wilhelm would be allowed to break his bond with Greta and form a new one with Helga. Greta would retain custody of Klaus, as was traditional for mothers of young pups. Wilhelm would provide financial support, but primary parenting would fall to Greta. It seemed fair on the surface. But Greta knew the truth. In werewolf society, a bonded pair had far more standing than a single mother. Wilhelm and Helga would be the golden couple, the rare second-chance mates who'd found each other. Greta would be the pitiable first wife, the one who couldn't keep her mate satisfied. Her mother, when Greta told her, went pale with fury. That treacherous girl, she'd hissed. I raised her better than this. I raised both of you to have honor. But even her mother's rage couldn't change the pack's ruling. Within a month, Wilhelm and Helga were bonded in a small ceremony that Greta didn't attend. They moved into a larger house on the western edge of territory. And Greta was left in the cabin she'd built with Wilhelm, surrounded by memories and raising Klaus alone. The next 6 months were the darkest of Greta's life. She threw herself into caring for Klaus and her work as a healer, trying to find purpose in the ruins of her life. But everywhere she went, she saw pitying looks, heard the whispers. Poor Greta. Couldn't keep her mate interested. The sister is so much prettier. Can you blame him? I heard she let herself go after the baby. No wonder he strayed. The worst part was watching Wilhelm and Helga play happy family. They'd take Klaus for scheduled visitation, and each time Greta handed over her son, she died a little inside. She knew Helga was trying to replace her, teaching Klaus to call her Mama Helga, buying him gifts, showering him with attention that felt performative and false. Klaus would come home confused. Why do I have 2 mamas? He'd ask in his small voice. You have 1 mama, Greta would say, holding him close. Helga is your aunt. But the confusion in Klaus's eyes broke her heart every single time. Wilhelm, to his credit, was a good father during visitation. But he was building a new life with Helga, and it was clear they wanted Klaus to be part of that picture. Rumor had it they were already trying for a pup of their own, eager to cement their new family. Greta felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She'd lost her mate, her sister, her standing in the pack, and now she could feel them trying to take her son too. The only thing that kept her going was Klaus himself. When he smiled at her, when he reached for her in the night, when he said "Mama" in that absolute trusting way that children have, Greta found the strength to face another day. She started to rebuild herself slowly. Lost the pregnancy weight not for anyone else, but because taking care of her body made her feel more in control. Deepened her healing skills, becoming one of the most knowledgeable medicine wolves in the pack. Built a small circle of friends who'd stuck by her, other women who'd been betrayed or dismissed, who understood what it was like to be on the outside. And she made a promise to herself. She would never let anyone make her feel worthless again. She would survive this. She would raise her son to be strong and kind. And someday, somehow, the universe would balance the scales. She just didn't know it would happen the way it did. The Midsummer Pack Gathering was the biggest event of the year for the Shadowmoon Pack. Wolves from allied packs would come to celebrate, to strengthen bonds, to let the young people meet potential mates. It was held in the great clearing at the heart of pack territory, with bonfires and music and enough food to feed an army. Greta almost didn't go. The thought of watching Wilhelm and Helga play the perfect couple in front of the entire pack made her stomach turn. But Klaus had been excited about it for weeks, and she refused to let her pain steal his joy. So she dressed in a simple blue dress, braided her dark hair, and held Klaus's hand as they walked to the gathering. The clearing was already crowded when they arrived. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats and fresh bread and summer fruits. Musicians tuned their instruments near the main bonfire. Children ran shrieking with laughter, playing games of tag and hide and seek. Greta found a spot near the edge of the clearing, settling Klaus with some other pups his age. She accepted a mug of mead from Frau Hildegard, who gave her hand a supportive squeeze. "Hold your head high," the old healer said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." Greta tried. She really did. But then Wilhelm and Helga arrived, and the crowd seemed to part for them like they were royalty. Helga was radiant in a white dress that showed off her figure, her hair falling in golden waves down her back. Wilhelm looked proud and content, his hand possessive on Helga's waist. They were the picture of perfect mates, and it made Greta want to vomit. The evening wore on. Greta stayed on the periphery, watching Klaus play, exchanging small talk with a few pack members who still treated her with genuine kindness. She was counting the minutes until she could reasonably leave without looking like she was running away. That's when she noticed Klaus staring at something across the clearing. Following his gaze, she saw Wilhelm and Helga standing with a group of high-ranking pack members, laughing at something the Alpha had said. Helga's hand was resting on her stomach, and with a jolt of shock, Greta realized her sister was showing signs of early pregnancy. So it was true. They were having a pup. Klaus would have a half-sibling. The knowledge sat like lead in Greta's stomach. This was it then. The final nail in the coffin of her old life. Wilhelm and Helga would have their own family, and Klaus would become less and less important to them. Just the reminder of the inconvenient first bond. Klaus tugged on Greta's skirt. "Mama, I'm tired." "Okay, love. Let's say goodbye and go home." They started making their way toward the edge of the clearing, planning to slip away quietly. But Klaus, tired and cranky, suddenly pulled free of Greta's hand and ran toward the group around Wilhelm and Helga. Greta's heart seized. She hurried after him, trying to catch him before he caused a scene. But Klaus was fast, and he'd spotted his father. "Papa!" Klaus called out. Wilhelm turned, his face lighting up. "Klaus, come here, son." Klaus ran up to him, and Wilhelm scooped him into his arms. The pack members cooed appropriately. Helga moved closer, reaching out to ruffle Klaus's hair with a proprietary gesture that made Greta's jaw clench. "Were you having fun?" Helga asked in that sweet voice that made Greta's skin crawl. Klaus nodded, but he was looking around at all the faces, suddenly overwhelmed by the attention. His lower lip started to tremble, the sign that he was about to have a meltdown from exhaustion. "I think he needs to go home," Greta said quietly, reaching for her son. But Helga was already there, trying to take Klaus from Wilhelm's arms. "Come to Mama, sweetheart. Let me." And that's when it happened. Klaus's face crumpled. He twisted out of Helga's reach and lunged toward Greta with the desperate need of an overtired child who wants his mother. "No. I want my mama." He practically leaped from Wilhelm's arms into Greta's, wrapping his little arms around her neck so tight she could barely breathe. And then, in the ringing silence that had fallen over the gathering, Klaus looked directly at Helga and said the words that would change everything. "You're not my mama. Yes. You're just Aunt Helga." If a pin had dropped in that clearing, everyone would have heard it. Every wolf within earshot had stopped talking, stopped moving, stopped breathing. All eyes turned to the scene unfolding near the Alpha. Wilhelm's face had gone white. Helga looked like she'd been slapped, her hand still outstretched where Klaus had rejected her. And Greta, holding her son close, felt something shift in the air around them. Klaus, oblivious to the drama he'd caused, burrowed his face into Greta's neck. "Go home, Mama. Wanna go home?" "What did you say?" Helga's voice was shrill, sharp enough to cut. "After everything I've done for you. After all the love I've shown you." Klaus peeked out from Greta's shoulder, his gray eyes, so like Wilhelm's, confused and a little frightened by Helga's tone. "But you're Aunt Helga," he repeated, as if stating a simple, obvious fact. The crowd began to murmur. Greta could feel the shift in pack sentiment like a physical thing. Because in wolf culture, children, especially young pups, were believed to have an innate sense of truth. They recognized their real family, their real pack, their real bonds before society taught them to pretend otherwise. Klaus's rejection of Helga wasn't just a tired child being contrary to the assembled pack, it was a declaration of truth. Helga wasn't his mother. Greta was. And no amount of play acting or wishful thinking could change that. Alpha Ludwig stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. "The pup has spoken," he said quietly, but his voice carried across the clearing. Wilhelm looked stricken. "He's just tired. He doesn't understand." "He understands perfectly," Frau Hildegard interrupted, her elderly voice strong. "Children always do. They see what we adults convince ourselves to ignore." Helga's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. Klaus loves me. We've been building a relationship. You've been trying to replace his mother," someone called out from the crowd. It was Frau Margarethi, the old wolf who often watched Klaus. "We've all seen it. Trying to make that boy forget who birthed him, who's cared for him every day of his life." More voices joined in, pack members emboldened by the Alpha's presence and Klaus's clear rejection. "It's not right trying to steal another woman's child. The boy knows his own mother. Maybe we were too hasty in approving this bonding." Wilhelm was looking around desperately, trying to regain control of the situation. "Everyone please, this is a misunderstanding. Klaus is part of our family." "He's part of Greta's family," the Alpha said firmly. "She's his mother. You're his father. That hasn't changed just because you took a new mate." The way Ludwig said "new mate" carried a weight of disapproval that wasn't lost on anyone. The Alpha had approved the bond between Wilhelm and Helga because pack law required it when mates claimed a true bond. But it was clear now, in front of everyone, that Ludwig had never been truly comfortable with the situation. Greta, still holding Klaus, felt tears prickling her eyes. For 6 months she'd endured whispers and pitying looks and the slow erosion of her place in the pack. And now, because her 3-year-old son had simply told the truth, the tide was turning. Klaus had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted by his emotional outburst. Greta shifted his weight, preparing to leave, but the Alpha held up his hand. "Greta Albrecht," he said formally. "You have borne this situation with dignity and strength. You have raised your son well. The pack sees this." It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get. Greta nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Ludwig turned his stern gaze on Wilhelm and Helga. "And you two will remember that Klaus's primary loyalty is to his mother, as it should be. You cannot force a child to love you, Helga Brenner. Love is earned, not demanded." Helga's eyes were bright with furious tears. She grabbed Wilhelm's arm. "Are you going to let them speak to me this way? To us?" But Wilhelm was staring at Klaus sleeping in Greta's arms, and something in his expression had shifted. Guilt. Regret. Greta couldn't tell and was too emotionally drained to care. "Let's go home," Wilhelm said quietly to Helga. As they walked away, Helga shot Greta a look of pure venom. But Greta just held her son closer and turned to leave the gathering. "Greta, wait." It was Wilhelm's voice. She stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "For all of it. You didn't deserve what we did to you." Greta looked over her shoulder at the man who had once been her everything. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "No," she agreed. "I didn't." She walked away from the gathering with Klaus in her arms, and for the first time in 6 months, she walked with her head held high. Behind her, she could hear the pack members talking, their voices no longer pitying but approving, supportive, respectful. The next few weeks brought changes Greta had never expected. Pack members who'd avoided her started greeting her warmly. The Alpha's mate, Frau Brunhild, invited her to join the Council of Pack Mothers, a position of honor. Wilhelm's visitation with Klaus continued, but now he came to Greta's cabin instead of expecting her to hand Klaus over like a package. And Helga. Helga withdrew from Pack's social functions, her pregnancy becoming the excuse for her absence. But Greta heard through the Pack grapevine that things between Wilhelm and Helga weren't as blissful as they'd appeared. Turned out that a relationship built on betrayal and deception didn't have the strongest foundation. Who would have thought? Klaus never wavered in his clear preference for Greta. When Wilhelm tried to get him to spend more time at his house, Klaus would cry and ask for his mama. Eventually, Wilhelm accepted what everyone else had already known. You couldn't force a bond that wasn't real. One evening, about a month after the Midsummer Gathering, there was a knock on Greta's door. When she opened it, she found her mother standing there with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," her mother said, "for not standing up for you more. For not seeing what Helga was becoming. I failed you as a mother." Greta pulled her into a hug. "You didn't fail me, Mama. You taught me to survive. And I did." They held each other as the sun set, two women who'd both been betrayed but had found their way back to each other. That night, after Klaus was asleep, Greta sat on her porch and looked up at the stars. She thought about the past year, the pain, the humiliation, the slow rebuilding of herself. She thought about how close she'd come to breaking completely. But she hadn't broken. She'd bent and she'd hurt, but she'd survived. And more than that, she'd learned something crucial about herself. She didn't need a mate to be complete. She didn't need her sister's approval or the Pack's pity. She had her son, her skills, her strength, and her dignity. Everything else was just noise. Wilhelm and Helga's pup was born that winter. A girl they named Brunhilde. Greta sent a gift, as was proper, but felt nothing but indifference toward the child. That was Wilhelm's new family, and Greta had made peace with it. Klaus grew into a smart, confident child who knew without doubt that his mama loved him. He had a relationship with his father, but it was Greta he ran to when he was hurt, Greta he wanted to share his triumphs with, Greta who tucked him in every night and kissed his forehead. The Pack's opinion had completely shifted. What had once been seen as a scandalous situation was now viewed as an object lesson in loyalty and motherhood. Greta became one of the most respected wolves in the Shadowmoon Pack, sought out not just for her healing skills but for her counsel and wisdom. She never did take another mate. Maybe she would someday, when Klaus was older and she felt ready to risk her heart again. But for now, she was content with the life she'd built from the ashes of her pain. As for Helga, Greta rarely saw her sister, and when she did, there was nothing between them but cold formality. Whatever love had once existed between them had been destroyed beyond repair. Helga had made her choice, and she would have to live with the consequences. A mate who couldn't fully trust her, a Pack that viewed her with suspicion, and the knowledge that she'd destroyed her relationship with her sister for a man who might not have been worth it after all. But that was Helga's burden to carry, not Greta's. Years later, when Klaus was 7 years old, he asked Greta a question while they were walking through the forest together. "Mama, do you think Papa and Aunt Helga are happy?" Greta thought about it carefully before answering. "I think they made choices that seemed right to them at the time. Whether those choices brought happiness, only they can say. Are you happy, Mama?" She looked down at her beautiful boy, so serious and thoughtful, and smiled. "Yes, love. I am." And she meant it. It wasn't the happiness she'd imagined when she was 23 and believed in fairy tales and forever. It was something deeper and harder one. The happiness of surviving something that should have destroyed you. The happiness of looking at your child and knowing you did right by him. The happiness of respecting yourself when you look in the mirror. That night, after Klaus was asleep, Greta stood on her porch again and looked at the stars. She thought about the girl she'd been, the woman she'd become, and the journey between the two. She thought about how one moment, one child's simple declaration of truth, had changed everything. How Klaus calling her Mama, in front of the Pack, had given her back her dignity and respect. And she thought about all the women out there who were going through their own versions of her story. Women who'd been betrayed, discarded, replaced. Women who felt worthless and broken. To them she wanted to say, "You are stronger than you know. Your worth is not determined by who chose to stay or leave. And sometimes when everything falls apart, It's not an ending but a beginning. Because here's what Greta learned through all of it. You can lose your mate. You can lose your sister. You can lose your place in society. But if you hold on to yourself, your integrity, your strength, your capacity to love and be loved, you haven't lost anything that truly matters. The truth always comes out eventually. Children see it. Good people recognize it. And the universe, in its own time and way, balances the scales. Klaus's little voice saying, "You're not my mama. She is," hadn't just been a rejection of Helga. It had been a declaration of truth that everyone had been too polite or too cowardly to say out loud. And that truth had set Greta free. She went inside, checked on Klaus one more time, and climbed into her own bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate. But tonight, Greta Albrecht slept the deep, peaceful sleep of a woman who knew exactly who she was. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The wolf inside her, once wounded and whimpering, now stood strong and proud. She had survived betrayal by the two people she'd loved most. She had endured public humiliation and fought her way back to respect. She had raised her son to know truth from lies, loyalty from betrayal. She had won. Not because she'd gotten revenge, or because Wilhelm and Helga's relationship had fallen apart, or because the pack had taken her side. She'd won because she'd refused to let them break her. Because she'd found strength she didn't know she possessed. Because she'd built a life worth living from the rubble of her broken dreams. And that, Greta knew, was the only kind of victory that truly mattered. Years would pass. Klaus would grow up strong and honorable, guided by his mother's example. He would find his own mate someday, and Greta would teach him that real love was built on respect and loyalty, not passion and impulse. That true bonds were tested and proven, not just felt and assumed. Wilhelm and Helga would have their daughter and maybe more children. They'd stay bonded, maybe even find a way to be happy, though rumor suggested their relationship was always tense, always shadowed by the betrayal that had formed its foundation. But Greta would thrive. She'd become a master healer, her skills sought by packs across the region. She'd raise Klaus to be the kind of man who valued integrity over convenience. She'd build friendships that lasted lifetimes. And maybe, if fate was kind, she'd find love again. Real love this time, with someone who saw her worth and treasured it. But whether she found another mate or not, she would be whole. Because she'd learned the hardest lesson of all. You can only be broken by someone else if you give them the power to define you. And Greta would never make that mistake again. The little boy who'd called her Mama, in front of the entire pack, had given her back more than just respect. He'd reminded her of who she was. Not Wilhelm's ex-mate. Not Helga's wronged sister. Not a victim to be pitied. Just Greta. Mother, healer, survivor, warrior. And that was enough. That was everything. Now, if this story touched something in you, if you felt that knife twist of betrayal or the slow climb back to yourself, I need you to do something. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's going through their own darkness and needs to know there's light on the other side. And don't forget, tell me where you're watching from. What city? What country? Because no matter where you are in the world, if you've ever been knocked down and had to find the strength to stand back up, I see you. Honor you. And I'm sending you that hug I promised. Drop your city in the comments. Hit that subscribe button. And remember, the truth always comes out. Your strength is real. And you are never, ever as alone as you feel in your darkest moments. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and know your worth.